All right, rolling on now to story number 2. This being, of course, the first week of May. We just passed Cinco de Mayo, May the 5th. Everyone got their tacos and their, what do they call their tequilas and everything. I'm not a big connoisseur on Mexican or Hispanic food. Mea culpa, mea culpa. I'm a little bit more at home with Italian stuff, but that's neither here nor there. So a good time was had by all because in the United States, Cinco de Mayo has really sort of become the Mexican version of St. Patrick's Day. Nobody who really celebrates St. Patrick's Day is really celebrating St. Patrick. They're not even really celebrating the Irish nation, Irish nationality, or just Irish quote-unquote ethnicity, Irish culture. It's basically just a day to that you use an excuse to wear green, drink beer, and for some people get slobberingly drunk. That's it. It has been reduced to that. And while I don't think that Cinco de Mayo has gone down quite that far, basically it's a day to eat tacos, drink tequila, and things like that. It's basically just a day to have fun anymore, and another excuse to have a party. And you might kind of quibble about that a little bit, but hey, you know what? If you're going to complain about that, complain about how they've treated St. Patrick's Day too. At least be an equal opportunity scold. But did you know that now we have received our orders, or we have received a decree from the heights of wokeness, that if you are a MAGA person, if you are a Donald Trump supporter, if you voted for the Donald, either in 2016 or 2020, that you are now ineligible to actually celebrate Cinco de Mayo. And if you do, you are nothing more than a sleazy, no good, rotten, stinking hypocrite. Yes, how do I know so? Well, because the Mary Sue told me so. Headline, this was written by Lyra Hale. Celebrating Cinco de Mayo while being MAGA makes you a hypocrite. This is from the piece. I know this might be difficult to hear, MAGA supporters of the failed former president, but it needs saying and you need to listen. Cinco de Mayo, a Latinx holiday grounded in Mexican history, is not yours to observe. I know, how dare I take away your right to margaritas and tacos. Well, the thing is that you can't be MAGA and celebrate Cinco de Mayo at the same time. And if you think you can, well, I've got news for you. That makes you a hypocrite of the highest order. Failed former President Donald Trump continuously vilified Latinx people during his campaign. He called us drug dealers, rapists, and criminals. He said that Latinx people were just flowing through the southern border like nothing, an obvious scare tactic for his MAGA fan base grounded in the fear of Latinx people taking their jobs, as ridiculous as that sounds. And Trump said he was going to build a wall while making Mexico pay for it, like that was actually ever going to happen. And that's basically the entire piece. Trump was horribly racist to Latinx people, and therefore, if you voted for him, you cannot celebrate Cinco de Mayo. Well, now, this piece is it's one of the paradoxes of our time, gang. The most ludicrous and unserious things in the world are now treated with the most seriousness. In a commonsensical society, Lyra Hall, which FYI to my ears does not sound like a Latina name, Lyra Hall wouldn't even be able to get that published probably on her own blog because no one would take it seriously. Like, really? Because you voted for candidate A in the presidential election instead of candidate B, I can't, wear a sombrero and just join in the fun and have some tacos at my local, church or whatever? What? I mean, come on, go fly a kite, lady. That would have been the reaction. But now, it's treated with absolute seriousness. And of course, because it is, but because it comes from a place of utter ideological zealousness. Not insanity, but ideological zealousness. There are multiple things wrong with it. I mean, in the first place, just to talk about practical things. I mean, Trump wasn't calling Latino people rapists and criminals. He was saying that a lot of the illegal aliens who are coming from Hispanic countries are actually rapists and murderers. And it's true, because now under the old moth-eaten old sock puppet that's in the Oval Office, and the southern border is now wide open, well, guess what? MS-13 gang members are coming through. MS-13 gang members who actually decapitate and flay their victims to install a sense of terror. Yeah, those people are actually coming through the southern border. A lot of criminals do, because a lot of people, they'll come through the southern border illegally, and then there were multiple cases like this. They killed Americans, whether deliberately or on accident, like in hits and runs. They were deported, then they came back, and they did the exact same thing again. They were drunk driving, and they committed a hit and run. So Trump was absolutely right about that when he said, for example, that Hispanic countries are not sending us their best. That's absolutely true in a sense, because the Hispanic governments, the governments of Mexico and Nicaragua and Guatemala and Panama and Peru, etc., everyone sort of south of the Rio Grande have figured out, hey, if America is wide open, if the United States is wide open, well, then we can send our poor people so then we don't have to deal with them. And that's absolutely true. That is actually what has been going on. Little tidbit here, Mexico has very stringent laws against illegal immigration. If you are an illegal immigrant in Mexico and you're caught, I believe that the first-time penalty is like 2 years in jail. And Mexican prisons are not like American prisons, from what I have heard. I don't have first-hand knowledge of either, in case you were wondering, but I have heard that Mexican prisons are not fun. They are not vacation goals like some American prisons are, where you're basically just living in a 3-star hotel for the next 10 years and you just can't check out, which is a little inconvenient. But hey, there are worse things as well. And yet, even though Mexico had those stringent laws, they were allowing illegal aliens from further south in Central and South America to come right through Mexico, because they knew that their next stopping place was across the Rio Grande. So Lyra Hall, she's talking out of her hat. I'm just going to say it. She's talking out of her ass when she's saying that, but she has to, in order that the narrative isn't glitched. But let's get into some of the real nitty-gritties here. Okay, gang, because this is what is most fascinating. This is what's really fascinating to me. Is Lyra Hall going to say that all of the Americans here in the United States who are of Latino descent, is she going to say that all of those people who voted for Trump are not actually Hispanic, so they cannot celebrate Cinco de Mayo either? That's what it would seem. And the answer, of course, is absolutely yes. This is another manifestation of that bogus bifurcation, that ideological dichotomy that was created by Nicole Hannah-Jones of the New York Times when she was saying, well, there's a difference between being politically black and racially black. You're seeing the same thing now here. There is a difference now between being politically Latino and ethically or racially Latino. You saw this right after that, well, after the 2020 presidential election, when serious people in so-called, supposedly serious publications like the Washington Post were actually seriously questioning whether Cuban Americans who have either immigrated from Cuba or whose family immigrated from Cuba in order to escape the tyranny of the Castro regime, whether they actually should be considered Latino, because you know what? A lot of them look white. They don't look brown, like a lot of other Hispanics from Mexico and Nicaragua and Guatemala, etc. So they don't look Hispanic. Plus, you know what? They vote for Trump, which means that they obviously have no idea what it's like to be a blue-collar, poor, guy who can't speak English, who illegally crossed the border 2 years ago and who is forced now to drive a truck and because he was given a license by the state of California and he's just still so completely in the shadows. They obviously don't know. Yeah. So now, where you're from, that doesn't make you Latino. It's what you look like and how you vote. That is racist and stereotypical, naturally. And that is actually a serious question, whether Lyra Hall would consider all the people who voted for Trump, Hispanics who voted for Trump, to actually be Hispanic. Like I said, no. And if that's the case, which it is, then she has just purged a lot of people out of the quote-unquote Hispanic community. This was actually from Bloomberg, and it was published on November 24th of last year. Trump's new Latino voters are sending Democrats a message. From the Tejanos, southeast Texas, to the Venezuelan American enclave west of Miami, and the Dominican Americans a few miles to the east, Latinos turned out in big numbers for President Donald Trump on November 3rd. Of all the election night surprises, this may have been the greatest. Even in Maricopa, the key county that Joe Biden captured en route to flipping Arizona into the Democrats' column for the first time in 2 decades, the Latino vote inched ever so slightly towards Trump. So there you go. And then they go on to say a majority of Latinos still voted for Biden. Yes, his victory in Arizona helped pave his way to the presidency. But he was trounced in Florida and Texas by margins that almost no pollster predicted, and the shifting Latino vote in those states was a big reason why. According to Lyra Hall, those people are not authentically Hispanic. So they're hypocrites if they celebrate Cinco de Mayo. Another manifestation where it's not actually your ethnicity that counts, it is how you think that counts, which is a totalitarian mindset by any stretch of the imagination. When ethnicity is tied now to ideology, when your heritage, your ancestry is tied to ideology, that is totalitarianism by any definition of the word. Now that's the first point. The second point, and this is a big one too, gang. This is a big one too. For a person who is complaining about white supremacy and white imperialism, Lyra Hall certainly seems to be pushing her imperialism onto everyone else. Latinx? Latinx, really? The Mexicans who won the Battle of Puebla, which is what actually Cinco de Mayo commemorates, would have looked at her with puzzlement if she actually dragged them into this hellhole of the 21st century and called them all Latinx. Okay? You can only actually do that. That actually signifies a woke, ideological, and imperialistic mindset. Latinx is a made-up word. It makes absolutely no sense in the parameters of the Spanish language and all the derivatives of the Spanish language that are spoken in the Hispanic world. So, Mexican, Cuban, Puerto Rican, Dominican, Nicaraguan, Peruvian, etc., 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 Belizean, etc., etc., etc. It makes absolutely no sense in that context. It is Latina or Latino. To call people Latinx, to basically erase not only male and female, but also to erase the rich history of the Spanish language and all those derivatives, to erase that with the ugly, ideologically woke, pure word Latinx, simply so that you can be quote-unquote politically Hispanic, that is a spit in the face to all the Hispanic people who have come before you, because now you, even if they are long dead in their grave, she is robbing them of their heritage. She is now conforming them and their bones to her sick, perverted ideology. That's the second thing. But the main thing, well, there's also the point too where she says, Cinco de Mayo is a quote-unquote Latinx holiday, but it's not. It's specifically a Mexican holiday. I don't know if people who come from the Dominican Republic or people who come from Belize or people who come from Panama specifically care about Cinco de Mayo one way or the other, because it's like, that's not my history and heritage. That's Mexico for for crying out loud. It's also funny how the very people that the left claims need to open their minds, they need multiculturalism, they need diversity, they need inclusion. Those are now the exact same people who are now forbidden from actually celebrating Cinco de Mayo. So you can't not only eat Mexican food or American Mex, whatever, but you can't attend, I would assume, any Cinco de Mayo festivals. You can't actually experience maybe a sliver of authentic Mexican culture. No, you are trapped in your bubble. So the very thing that they say that you need is the very thing that they're going to deny you. That is interesting, even in and of itself. But the big point, gang, to wrap this all up in a bow, to wrap this story up, is this. This story on the Mary Sue, it is another example of how ordinary everyday life is shrinking for the people who don't toe the ideological line. 5 years ago, 10 years ago even, it didn't matter whether, in 2008, it didn't matter whether you had voted for Obama or for McCain. You could celebrate Cinco de Mayo. You could have Mexican food and drink tequila. 2012, it didn't matter whether you voted for Obama or that Squish Romney. It was the same thing. But now, the parameters of ordinary everyday life are shrinking. So that now, if you vote for the wrong candidate, if you espouse the wrong positions, if you speak the wrong way, if you express the wrong idea, you are a leper. And all of the things, not even just your job, not even just your status in the community, not just maybe your social media accounts, but simple, ordinary, in a sense, meaningless, trivial, petty things, like going to a Cinco de Mayo celebration that your local church threw on, that is now denied to you. That is now denied to you. The life, as it becomes more and more political and more infused with ideological wokeness, manifested especially through politics in our case, the more that life becomes narrower and narrower, and this decision becomes starker and starker for you either to toe the line, allow the left to baptize your soul, or to actually become more and more isolated, which means that you are easier and easier to pick off once the actual political persecutions come. That is also a sign of a totalitarian society, when the confines of normal life depend upon how you voted. That is when Big Brother is firmly entrenched in his ministries, regardless of whether the left continues to say that they have to save democracy or not. That is story number 2.